called ethnic cleansers, baby killers, guilty of genocide. These are not the kinds of peaceful protests that we are used to seeing in our community.
Our family attends Mass every Sunday at our local church. And to think that we would be threatened or intimidated before we sit in our pews is unfathomable.
The right to protest needs to not interfere with the rights of others to safety and security in their homes and neighborhoods. And right now it does.
As a defender of Palestinian rights, the proposed bylaw is problematic on so many levels, it's hard to know where to begin.
This bylaw is rushed, and the language potentially infringes on rights of freedom of speech and assembly, and can be misused or maliciously used to target people and organizations like I have mentioned earlier.
It has become too easy and too accepted for some among us to cross lines that not that long ago would be unthinkable.
There is no justification for targeting places of worship as venues for protests, except to instill fear within a vulnerable community.
When I see an Israeli flag, I feel like I'm looking at an early 1940s German national flag that supports human rights violations and war crimes against my relatives.
David Menzies for Rebel News here in Vaughan, Ontario. And folks, I'm outside Vaughan City Hall, and there's going to be a vote today regarding a proposed bylaw. And what that bylaw is all about is establishing a 100-meter bubble zone, if you will, that would protect so-called vulnerable pieces of infrastructure. That would include places of worship, schools, childcare facilities, and so forth. And we're expecting a lot of passionate responses on both ends of this equation. And we can't help but... Oh, sorry, ma'am. Did you want to weigh in on this, or? Sorry, who's racist? Oh, what makes her racist? As you can see, I think we know on which end of the equation you are if you're wearing the kaffifa. They did a drive-by slander of Councillor Gila Marteau, calling her racist. I asked what makes her racist, and I think the answer was she's racist. So, we just see so much of this kind of hatred on the streets of our cities these days post the October 7th massacre. And by the way, particular to Vaughan, in the community of Thornhill, we were there a few months ago, the Rebel News team, to witness what was taking place outside of synagogues. These were people that don't live in Thornhill, that came from out of town, to chant genocidal doctrine. I'm not making this out, and then got violent. Check it out.
What do you want? Justice! What do you want it? Palestine is not for sale! Zionist, go to hell!
Go to the other side! No, we're not in Gaza. We're not under Sharia law, sir.
Other side! They have every right to protest. They could do it at a peaceful place like City Hall, but not in front of a synagogue.
This is your house? House is down there. What's your house? Back up.
That's my house.
Okay, no, so what's not her house? We are here because this place of worship has chosen to make their venue a real estate venue to sell illegally occupied land.
Is it possible that you're living on stolen land also, according to your very argument?
So it was extremely ugly indeed. In any event, we're going to go into the council chambers, see what the arguments are. I'm sure there's going to be passion on both ends of this argument. Let's see what those who are in favor and against this proposed bylaw have to say.
This kind of approach to demonstrations, regardless of one's perspective on any given issue, is not consistent with Vaughan's values. And so my resolution, which council supported, and this proposed bylaw are the specific response to this disturbing situation.
We did not have a peaceful protest outside of our synagogue. We had what was clearly a mob who were held back because of the good efforts and work of York Regional Police Services and all of the care of the elected officials in our area.
We have to maintain civility, we have to maintain community relations, and the solution to the rancor is not more rancor. The solution to the rancor is dialogue, peaceful communication, political advocacy, and we would just like a restoration of normalcy to our lives.
The freedom of peaceful assembly is enshrined in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. However, this freedom cannot include threats, intimidations, and violence directed towards any groups, especially vulnerable ones such as Jews, Muslims, and young children. The bylaw being proposed is especially important as it aims to protect social infrastructures such as religious institutions, schools and daycare centers, hospitals, etc.
I'm a very proud Canadian. I do believe, like everybody else has said, the right to protest peacefully is an important part of a democracy. But in Vaughan, Toronto, and many cities around North America and the world, protest has crossed a very, very dangerous line into hate speech, harassment, property damage, and even assault.
The elephant in the room is that the synagogue was hosting an event that was engaged in part in illegal activity. The selling of occupied land as a matter of international law is illegal. Bylaws are meant to address real problems. A real threat to society is the lack of accountability by those who seek to profit from the sale of occupied Palestinian land. Let's be real. Demonstrators do not pose any threat to infrastructure in Vaughan.
Protesting outside these sacred spaces is not only inappropriate, but it also infringes upon the rights of those seeking to use them.
The bylaw in its current language will be viewed as an attempt to politicize the issue, deliberately disregard the community's concerns, and as an attempt to limit basic rights and freedoms of citizens and residents of the city of Vaughan.
We regularly hear calls for intifada, the elimination of Israel from the river to the sea, where my son is studying next year, and masked protesters wearing the symbols of Hamas and Hezbollah, two terror organizations that are committed to acts of violence against Jews around the world.
So why do progressive Jews reject this proposed bylaw? First, this bylaw would not increase our safety. The Vaughan staff report on the proposed bylaw provides examples of alleged hate crimes, but not a single one of the examples cited, arson, bomb threats, vandalism, shooting at buildings, would have been prevented by the proposed bylaw.
And what starts out as free speech often ends up as hate speech, and much more.
This bylaw seeks to limit my rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in order to give a safe space on Canadian soil to war criminals from a foreign entity to commit war crimes with impunity because it's being held in a place of worship, even though it has nothing to do with religion.
And I think that something has shifted within our society, not just in the city of Vaughan, and not just in Canada, but worldwide. There's a new ideology of militancy that seeks not to engage in dialogue and peaceful protest, but rather seeks to dominate, to suppress, to shout over and make sure that their opponents are not heard and that they are rather canceled. There's no desire for an exchange of ideas. There's only a desire to eliminate.
Muslims will always seek for peace. Muslims will never want to harm anyone for access of anybody's places of worship. And we feel, or I feel personally, that this bylaw will provide me that protection should things happen that will prevent me from doing that.
I'm glad that our mayor has stepped up to the plate, and I commend him for what he's done. And I'm speaking now because I hope that other municipalities will follow.
So the motion's on the floor. Any opposition? Motion carries.
Well, there you have it. The motion was carried, and I can tell you that the hammer in this bylaw is that if you are convicted of violating that 100-meter so-called bubble zone, you face a fine of up to $100,000. But here's the deal, folks. Even if the bylaw is implemented, will it be enforced? I mean, right now in our Great Dominion, we have Section 3191 of the Criminal Code, and that's all about inciting or promoting hatred. We do have hate speech laws on the books, but we have seen, going back to last October, that those laws are simply not being enforced by law enforcement. In fact, it seems that the police are defaulting to a keep the peace philosophy. Translation, don't go after the people chanting genocide, but rather go after peaceful counter demonstrators, go after members of the independent media. So at the end of the day, for me, the question arises, will this bylaw be enforced? Because quite clearly, Section 319 of our hate speech laws is not. For Rebel News, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. You know, it's been a sad spectacle on the streets of our Great Dominion, hasn't it, folks? People openly chanting for genocide and law enforcement turning the other cheek. Our political leaders refusing to outright condemn it. Disgraceful. If you feel like we do, please go to our petition at deporthamas.com. That's deporthamas.com. I'm sorry, but if you are a visitor here, if you are on a visa, if you are a foreign student, and you are breaking our laws, if you are chanting genocide, time to pack your bags and go.